Hello, my sassy turtles. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. So I'm clearly filming in a new location. I am filming in Poland, where I'm staying with my grandma in her apartment type of place. And so I was thinking of what kind of video I should do. And I found something called the language tag, and I figured what better time to do the language tag than when I'm in Poland, where I constantly am speaking a different language other than English. So as some of you may know, because I know I've mentioned this a bunch of times before, I want to learn 7 languages eventually. So far I know English, Polish, Spanish. I'm currently learning Japanese and French, and I'm hoping to possibly do maybe German and Swedish. But anyways, before I get ahead of myself, let me just get right into the questions. So question number 1 is, what do you consider to be your native language? Now, this is something that's kind of hard to answer because my first language was actually Polish, but the one that I use most often is English. I'm fluent in both of them. I have no problem speaking either of them. So I guess it depends on how you define a native language. If you define a native language as like the first language you learned, then I would say Polish. If you define it as the one you've been using more during your life, I would say English. So I guess it's between those two. So question number 2, what was your first language learning experience? So my first language learning experience was probably in elementary school when I started learning Spanish. They offered after school Spanish classes for students who wanted to start learning Spanish. And yeah, I remember always learning a lot of fun games, and then I remember when I learned the word cebolla, which is onion. I always thought of how similar it is to cebula, which is onion in Polish. And I don't know why I remember that specifically, but that is one of my most vivid memories from that language learning class. So yeah, I don't know, it's kind of, it's odd. Especially since I absolutely hate onions. So I don't know, I guess I thought it was cool that the words were kind of similar. So number 3 is, what languages have you studied and why did you start learning them? So like I said, I know Polish and English just because that's what I speak at home and in school and just in my everyday life. Then I've been taking Spanish classes on and off throughout my whole life until I started high school, which is when I started taking actual courses in Spanish. And so Spanish just seemed like a very good language to learn, especially if I really get the hang of Spanish, because I'm basically fluent in Spanish, but the thing is, when I start getting nervous, I honestly sound like a second-year Spanish speaker, like somebody who's only been learning Spanish for 2 years. Even though I'm really good at Spanish, I'm really good especially at writing and just phrasing things, but I think it's mostly because I'm an introvert, and so speaking even in English is sometimes difficult for me. So I just kind of have to get over my nervousness to actually speak Spanish out loud, and I feel like that would just make such a big difference. Basically, I started learning it because being trilingual, how do you pronounce that word? I've never had to say it out loud. Oh dear. Anyways, knowing English, Polish, and Spanish in the US opens up a lot of opportunities, just because, especially in the Midwestern area, those are the 3 most common languages. I'm also learning French and Japanese just because I really like the sound of them. Plus, I really wanted to learn an Asian language, and so Japanese seemed like the most interesting one for me. I just liked it the most. I liked the sound of it. Plus, as you probably know, I really like Japanese culture. And of course, the 2 that I haven't really started yet are Swedish and German. I mostly like Swedish just because it seems like a fairly easy language. Not a super easy language, but that's what I've heard, that it's fairly simple. Plus, I kind of like the sound of it. And then German, I originally started learning because I had a friend who spoke German. We don't speak anymore. But then I sort of started learning a couple of German words. I knew how to flirt in German at one point, because if you use Duolingo to study languages, one of the courses is flirting. So yeah, I knew how to flirt in German, even though I had no one to flirt with in German. All of the pickup lines were terrible though. It's not like I would use them in real life anyways. So number 4 is, how does your personality affect how you learn languages? I wouldn't say my personality really affects how I learn languages. I think just my learning style and my schedule kind of affects how I learn languages. For example, I have a Japanese language learning audiobook in my car just because I spend a lot of time in my car. And also I have a Polish Japanese language learning book. So basically a book that's written in Polish, intended for Polish people to be learning Japanese. Just because for some reason it's a lot easier for me to learn Japanese using Polish rather than English as like the base. I think partially it's just because there's a lot of like grammatical things that don't exist in English. 5 is, do you prefer learning languages in class or individually? And honestly, the answer is I like to have a combination of both, just because sometimes it's a lot easier to have someone teaching you, because that way you know exactly how to pronounce things, you know if you're saying things correctly, because if you're learning by yourself, you might think that you're saying something correctly, but then you're actually saying it completely wrong. But then at the same time, when I'm learning individually, I can kind of go at my own pace, and there's also no pressure of like having grades and trying to get good grades, and then I can just focus on the language. So personally, I like a combination of the two. Number 6 is, what are your favorite language learning materials? Honestly, my favorite app, and they're not sponsoring me. I wish they were, because I just love this app so much. I've mentioned it earlier in this video. It's called Duolingo, and basically it's just a language learning app. I use it mainly for French because they don't have Japanese yet. And it's just a very handy app because especially like you can learn languages on the go, and it has like a lot of like practice questions for you in different formats, like translating from English or to English, or like matching words. And so it makes language learning a lot easier. So if you are trying to learn a language, I would recommend trying Duolingo. So number 7 is, how much time do you spend actively learning a language per day/week? For me, it really depends just because of how my schedule is. I'm a college student, so sometimes I have a ton of free time, and then other times I have like 5 projects, 3 essays, and 2 tests all due in one day. So I can't really say that I have like a steady schedule for language learning. That's also why I'm so behind. So number 8 is, what are your short-term and long-term language learning goals? Like I said, I would like to know 7 languages eventually. That's my long-term goal. And a short-term goal of mine would be to actually like find time to learn languages more often. Like I said, I'm a little bit behind from where I'd like to be, so that's definitely like my number 1 short-term goal. 9 is, what is your favorite language? And that is a very difficult one. I would say French and Japanese probably are both my favorite languages, just because those were always like my favorite 2 languages that I always really wanted to learn. So I guess I would have to say those are my favorites, even though I don't really know them that well yet. Number 10 is, what is the next language you want to learn? I already answered this a bunch of times. Currently working on Japanese and French, possibly doing German and Swedish in the future. And finally, number 11 is, what advice can you offer to new language learners? I would say that my biggest tip is don't give up, because that's what I've noticed with a lot of my friends that wanted to learn other languages. When it got too hard or when they just didn't have enough time, they just kind of gave up on the language. And so obviously if you give up, you're never gonna learn it. So just don't give up on it, keep working on it, find every little bit of time that you can spare. Like I said, I have an audiobook because I commute to college and I spend like anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours driving, just like total during the day. So I got myself that language learning audiobook, so now I can use that time a little better than just sitting in the car and driving and sitting in traffic. But yeah, that's about it. I know a lot of you guys were kind of curious about why I want to learn 7 languages and like how I'm doing it. So I was originally gonna make another video about this, being like more detailed about me wanting to learn 7 languages. But then I found this tag, and so I thought that it was kind of a good like introduction. And if any of you guys would maybe want to hear like more details about me wanting to learn 7 languages, just let me know, because I was planning to make a full video explaining all of that anyways. So if anybody would actually be interested in seeing that, just leave it down in the comments or go tweet me or anything like that. Also, make sure to leave a like if you liked this video, subscribe if you'd ever like to see this face ever again, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!